Welcome to Peacock Alley. This is Gary Eminent with your host, Dale Wetzel. Tonight is Valentine's Day. Dale, this Peacock Alley is packed tonight. I had a chat with Dale Zimmerman and Melody. I teased
Dale, explain who Dale Zimmerman is.
Dale Zimmerman is the owner of the Peacock Alley, and he just got a big award this last week in Tampa from the beef stockmen and the beef producers, and it was a big deal. But I was teasing Melody. His wife was down here working behind the counter taking people back to the table, and I said, see, Dale took you out for dinner tonight. She was all dressed up, looked really sharp, and the reality is she's working tonight. But that's what being an entrepreneur is about. Tonight is a big day for them when you're in business and you got a fine restaurant.
And you got customers waiting to get in. And it's outstanding.
I asked Dale if the tables are full, and I said, is the restaurant full tonight? And he said, we're going to turn the tables 2 or maybe 3 times. And so, but what they have is they have a set menu tonight. It's like $79, and I was going to have something to eat in the bar before the show. Well, I had to have Dustin was going to be my date because my wife's home babysitting tonight since I'm doing the radio show. She's watching our granddaughter. But the reality was it's going to cost me $80, and they had a lot of nice options. You could pick beef and seafood, etc., but you had to follow the set menu. So I decided I was going to be not eating tonight since I'm not with my bride tonight.
Not an $80 meal.
Tonight's a great night to be out at Peacock Alley or around town in Bismarck and for taking your Valentine out. So we got a good show, Dale. It was a busy day at the Legislature today.
It was indeed. We had, first of all, I'll start by describing some legislative hearings that we had. One of them was there's a bill that would allow the Secretary of State to postpone an election for up to 30 days if there is an emergency, a state disaster or emergency that's been declared that's likely to interfere with the election. And the Secretary of State would be given, according to this bill, emergency authority to postpone elections. And the election could be postponed for no more than 30 days. I'm really interested to see how well this bill does in the House, because the idea of letting an official postpone an election, regardless of the reason of it, sounds rather it sounds like a black helicopter idea to me.
Yeah, what's the source? Who's the sponsor of this bill? Is it a?
I don't have the sponsor in front of me. I just have the bill number.
It's interesting.
But it's a Republican sponsor, I'm pretty sure.
Huh.
And maybe the Secretary of State asked for the bill. I have not spoken to him about it, but it does appear to be a rather interesting idea. Last night, as you remember, we had some Democratic legislators on to talk about ethics bills that they introduced, and they had their hearing today in the House Government and Veterans Affairs Committee. One of the bills would create a legislative ethics committee, and calling it a legislative ethics committee is a bit too limiting, because this committee would be able to investigate complaints against candidates for any office, candidates for judgeships, for legislative offices, for statewide offices, also incumbent office holders and judges, even Supreme Court justices. So it's quite comprehensive, and it would be it would give this commission essentially authority to investigate these folks. They would take complaints, decide whether the complaints have merit, and then institute some investigations of anyone that was deemed to be, frankly, worthy of investigation. What do you think about that, Gary?
Oh, there you go, Dale. I got my mic all screwed up. Well, I think the point of it is, if you're going to have the investigation side, I question the reality of that authority when you have that going on. Who's going to make those determinations? I think there's I get a little frustrated with the side of coming up with something that could be fairly subjective. And the comment was they didn't want it to be a witch hunt, that could turn into a witch hunt. And the reality is it surely could, because who's to make that call if you got a mixed, depending on the parties in power related to that. So,
yeah, I'm sure that the sponsors are folks of good faith, and I'm sure that what they're looking for is the idea that we have some place to take complaints against elected officials aside from the ballot box, and maybe a way to penalize them aside from having them lose an election or having them recalled. But you'd need an investigation to decide whether there should be an investigation, and it seemed like there's a great potential for mischief there. Maybe the idea needs to be a bit fine-tuned. But it was quite interesting to listen to the comments about that particular bill. And there's also other bills that have to do with the reporting of campaign expenditures, that have to do with the reporting of gifts to legislators. Maybe gifts is too strong a term, but when a legislator, for example, has a expenses paid trip to Las Vegas to attend a conference so that an interest group can present him or her with policy suggestions and maybe even suggested legislation. That sort of thing should be disclosed. And one of the arguments that's made is that, well, why should we disclose it? Because there's no taxpayer money involved. Well, that's really beside the point. I mean, if you have interest groups laying out the bucks to influence legislators and trying to get them to introduce your pet proposals in the legislature, well, that should be disclosed.
Dale, even beyond that, I think they ought to disclose every trip they take personally, because when I listened to the discussion last night, it sounded fairly subjective. I mean, if they were influence a bill, sometimes I've been to different conferences in my life, and sometimes you don't know quite the objective of why you're there. If you're going to if you're traveling as an elected official to a conference and it's specific, even if people know where you're going and it's funded, I think it ought to be disclosed personally.
I don't know if I'd go along with that, because what I'm thinking here is there are some legislators that are active in groups that have nothing to do with their legislative work. I'm thinking specifically like Carolyn Nelson, a senator from Fargo, a Democratic senator from Fargo. She's very involved in a national music organization. I mean, as far as I know, they have nothing whatsoever to do with politics. She doesn't introduce bills that affect them. But I imagine that this organization helps her travel. And I mean, I have not asked her about it, but I imagine that they do. And, having to report travel that you take, like for a music organization, or if you're a member of the Corn Growers or something of that nature.
That's good.
I don't know if that's necessarily something that you need to have to report. But if it's some sort of public policy organization, whether it's the American Legislative Exchange Council or even the National Conference of State Legislatures or the Council of State Governments, or then there's various energy forums now that involve legislators. There's organizations that attract legislators who are interested in insurance and all sorts of workers' compensation and all sorts of public policy subjects. Those should be disclosed. I mean, if a legislator is getting money to go off and to Puerto Rico or Florida or wherever to hobnob with other folks and get public policy suggestions from whoever it might be, whether it be an interest group or other legislators or something, it should be disclosed. I mean, there's no harm in it. I mean, if there's nothing wrong with what they're doing, there's nothing wrong with disclosing it either.
Well, I think not only legislators but our elected officials, I mean, Republican or Democrat, I think there needs to be a little bit more disclosure and transparency on trips they take, even if they're, because sometimes, I mean, I'm not going to point names, but a lot of times elected officials on a state level take a position, then they run for a national board, and then they end up traveling and spending about half their time in a national board. I'm going, are you really doing your job? I mean, I like the prestige of maybe come to North Dakota, you're learning stuff, but at the same time, how much are you gone? And are you doing your job? Because we elected you and you're paying 6 digits, and I don't care what party you are, there ought to be more disclosure with that personally, and accountability.
And are you networking? I mean, I can think of a recent example, and I'm sure that you can too, of a gentleman who was part of a national organization and basically used his membership in that national organization to do some networking and get a fairly lucrative consultancy when he resigned his position. And having that sort of information available as a voter, I think that that's worthy of knowing. Gary, I think we should mention we've had a gentleman come and join us. Normally we have a couple folks from the North Dakota Chamber of Commerce to talk about the week that was in the legislature on Thursday evenings, but they're missing a bit. They're not here right now.
Maybe out on Valentine's Day.
And maybe it's Valentine's Day does tend to do things to one's schedule, and
not you and I, of course. We're working.
No, and plus I'm not going out on any dates with you. We have with us Senator John Warner of Ryder. He's a Democrat. He's the Senate Democratic Caucus Chairman, and frankly, he's a former state House member and a fascinating individual, and also a quite excellent singer. I don't know if we're going to have him sing this evening. In fact, I suspect not. But
well, we got a good stage up here. We could open the doors up, and he could serenade the guests down there.
And one of the things we're going to be speaking with Senator Warner about later on is a bill that he sponsored, essentially to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. And Senator Warner, were you? Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of walk through what happened in terms of how the bill was defeated today.
Okay.
There was an amendment to the bill that was presented, and essentially it was frankly one of the stranger amendments that I've ever seen in the legislature. It said, we the state of North Dakota, we do not condone discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, whether it's homosexuality, heterosexuality, or bisexuality. But if you do find yourself discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation, there's nothing you can do about it. You cannot go to court. You cannot sue anyone. You cannot enforce your rights. And it was explicitly spelled out in the amendment that we don't like this, but if it happens to you, tough.
Too bad.
Too bad. And I was thinking, I wish the traffic laws worked this way. I was thinking, okay, 70 miles an hour. It says there's a sign that says on the interstate that says you shall drive 75 miles an hour. That's the limit. And if you drive faster than that, then you're going to get a ticket, or at least you're going to run the risk of getting a ticket. But if we applied this kind of logic that was applied to this anti-discrimination bill, what would happen was, okay, if you drive faster than 75 miles an hour, no problem. You're not going to get busted or anything. It's just kind of an advisory thing. We deplore in North Dakota driving faster than 75 miles an hour, but if you do it, no problem. You're not going to get a ticket or anything. You're not going to risk any penalty. I thought that was very strange, and in fact, the Senate Democratic leader, Max Schneider of Grand Forks, said in a speech that when the Senate was discussing this amendment, that he said that there was nothing like it in state law, where essentially you have a prohibited practice in state law, but if that prohibited practice is gone ahead and done, if the thing that's proscribed happens anyway, there's nothing you can do about it. And he said that there was nothing like that in North Dakota law. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and he is, and I suspect he knows what he's talking about. And certainly there's nothing that's come up that's even remotely equivalent to that since I've been covering the legislature. That's been for a long time. And
that came out in committee today?
What happened is that the amendment was on the Senate floor. It was drawn in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it was presented on the Senate floor as committee amendments are, and it was described in I thought a very honest and straightforward fashion as exactly what it did. And there was a vote on the amendment, and the amendment was defeated. This amendment was not attached to the bill that we're talking about, but it was defeated. But then the bill itself, which was the same bill that Senator Warner sponsored, without amendments. That bill, in turn, was also defeated. And so we don't have this anti-discrimination bill with us anymore. And one of the things that it would be one of the things we want to talk to Senator Warner about, and we're going to have some of his co-sponsors joining us a bit later. Where do we go from here?
I'd like to back up just a hair.
Please, please do.
It's true, and Senator Schneider spoke to it today. It's a very unusual thing to have a sanction recorded in law. It's stated explicitly that we do not condone, but there's no recourse. You mentioned, Mac said that he didn't know of another thing. Actually, flaring came immediately to mind, the flaring of natural gas. We have got some very strong prohibitions about that we do not approve of flaring. It's a horrible thing, and it's a state policy that we will not flare. And then it lists a whole bunch of exceptions, and then you get to the very end of the actual section in law, or unless you don't feel like it.
Yes. And the Industrial Commission can forgive your sins and absolve you of your flaring shortcomings, and say go forth and flare. As long as no one builds a pipeline to your gas well, go ahead and waste all the gas you want, and you don't have to pay the royalties, you don't have to pay the taxes. Just have at it.
And Senator Snyder is very earnest, and he's very, very focused on human rights law, and he's certainly an expert on WSI law, and so I'm sure that he was referring to those types of sanctions where there's a clear legal framework for recourse. One of the things you didn't mention, though, is that there's actually two further clauses in the bill which had absolutely nothing to do with what was introduced.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't mention those.
And one of those had to do with actually increasing the opportunities for discriminating against the aged. Federal law and North Dakota law, ever since 1983, when it was introduced, has put a minimum age for seeking recourse against age discrimination at the age of 40. Now, for you and I suspect that seems kind of young. But I'm sure that there are some occupations in which 40, at the time it was introduced, I would guess maybe flight attendant, female news anchor, television anchor, something like that.
Or a construction worker, someone who beats their body up every day.
And in Senator Hoag's amendment, he raised that to 55, which many people would find to be a pretty advanced age for some occupations. One of the things that we spend an awful lot of time with is talking about protecting the middle class, but we don't talk about protecting the middle-aged. And it seems like a strange thing. We think of age discrimination as being against the elderly, but there's a critical time in the career of our life when we've gotten our families out of the home, we've got them through college, we've got them established, and there's about a 20-year period from roughly 45 to 65 when that's the time when we're going to be socking away money. Should be our maximum earning income time, and that's the time when we have that we actually have an opportunity to be putting away money for our own retirement. And if you have some sort of hiccup or stumble or fall during that period, if you have an illness, if you lose your job, lose your health insurance, it's very hard to catch up. I mean, it's very hard to make up that time during that critical 20-year period. And it's a time when a lot of people's bodies are starting to wear out prematurely if they've been in occupations which require a lot of heavy labor, as does farming or construction. And it's also a time when you can kind of look in the rearview mirror and see a coming generation coming up behind you, people whose skill sets are more current and whose have more energy. They may have less wisdom. They may be able to do it all night but not have a clue of what they're doing. So.
Yes.
And I think that's a critical piece. The other part of Senator Hoag's amendment reduced under current law, a court can find that if you have proven discrimination, that you can go back and seek as much as 2 years of back pay. Now, the courts have discretion as to what the actual damage is, but 2 years is a maximum amount that they can look at. Senator Hoag's amendment reduced that to 1 year. And for some people in some occupations, it may be very difficult to find a comparable job within a year.
When that discussion was being had, one of the things I thought of was, one of the arguments that was made in favor of shortening this window from 2 years to 1 was that North Dakota's got a great economy. Surely it's not going to take you 2 years to find another job. Well, maybe it will take you 2 years, or maybe you never will find another job that paid you as well as the job that you were aced out of because of age discrimination. And so I thought that was a bit of a dodgy explanation. I mean, of course you can find a job. You can find another job. Can you find a comparable job? Can you find a job that pays you as well as the job you had? And I thought you mentioned a television news anchor. That might actually be quite apropos. I mean, if you're a highly paid television news anchor and you get bounced because you're older and they want someone younger, where does that person go to get a comparably paying job?
Well, and I even take 1 year. Well, the economy is good today, but who knows what 12 months or 3 years brings. So you don't change a law based on a spike we have.
Yeah.
We all like to think it's going to be 20 years, but we're all thinking we cross our fingers and hope it's at least 3, you know?
Yeah.
We're spending like it's going to be 20 years. That's why I look at it. So
Yes. I mean, where does this bill go from here, do you think? I mean, the Senate passed a somewhat similar bill 2 years ago.
It was nearly identical 4 years ago, actually, in 2009.
Yes.
We had the only difference between the current iteration of the bill and the 2009 iteration was that the 2009 version was silent on the issue of religious exemptions. And we relied pretty heavily on just acknowledging that the Constitution provided ample protections for religious organizations, which you can call it discernment or discrimination. But it's a legitimate function of religion to make decisions on who's going to belong to you, who you're going to associate with. That's an important function of religion. And the Constitution is quite explicit on allowing that. And the only difference between this version is that we put some assurance clauses in it. We put 3 different sentences, one which we might call the ministerial exemption, which allowed them to discriminate in the actual hiring of priests and ministers and nuns and catechists. There was another one that dealt with volunteers in the organization. If they had a youth organization and they were uncomfortable with hiring people based on sexual orientation, that was a legitimate reason. And the third one had to do with parochial schools.
We'll be speaking to this at more length in our second half hour. This is the Legislature Today radio show. My name is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host, and we've been speaking to Senator John Warner, a Democrat from Ryder and the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus.
welcome back to Peacock Alley. This is Gary Emineth and with Dale Wetzel, your host. Tonight's Valentine's Day. We were talking earlier about the Valentine's Day chef special for $79. I did find out, I got a text in here wanting to know if that included wine. Well, Dale, I did find out it includes a complimentary bottle of wine or champagne with that $79. So,
well, there you go. There you go.
So you can have Cabernet, Merlot, Chardonnay, White Zinfandel, or Spumante champagne included in that $80. That's for 2.
How about single malt scotch? Is that in there?
Nope, you're going to have to dig into your pocket a little deeper for that, baby.
Okay.
But you can't have prime rib, surf and turf, or honey sesame pork. And I can tell you that prime rib looked like about 3 pounds. Everybody that's having that is going to be having it for lunch tomorrow, too.
Okay.
I suspect. So anyway, we had a good first half hour. Dale, why don't you take away and talk to our guest about what you want to chat about tonight?
We have a group of 3 folks that we're going to talk about an anti-discrimination bill that failed in the Senate today. We have the bill's principal sponsor, Senator John Warner. He's a Democrat from Ryder, North Dakota, and he is the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus. He used to be in the House, but that was a while ago. We also have a couple of new Democratic House members. We have Kylie Oversen of Grand Forks, and we also have Representative Joshua Boschee from Fargo. I've been mispronouncing his name earlier. I'm sorry about that. And these folks are all sponsors of this bill that failed in the Senate today, and we're here to talk about essentially where things go from here, because this is not the first time that a bill of this nature has come before the legislature. It was in the Senate 4 years ago in 2009, and it failed then. Actually, it passed, and it was defeated in the House subsequently. And this version of the bill, actually had more things in it to to placate concerns of religious organizations that wondered if a policy against discrimination against gays and lesbians would actually interfere with their religious beliefs, and there was language in this bill intended to address that, and this bill failed anyway. And Senator Warner, I wanted to ask you, where do you think things go from here in terms of the future? What lessons have been learned, if any, that can make a pitch for legislation such as this more effective in the future?
Well, I think that we just need to keep the issue before the public and candid conversations with people all across the political spectrum. I think there's a growing awareness of the presence of homosexuals and people whose orientations are slightly different within all of our families. And I've yet to run into anybody who doesn't have a close friend or a close family member who is homosexual or bisexual. And I think there's a growing awareness of just the normalcy of it, that these are normal people, they have normal aspirations, they have some of them extraordinary talents. I mean, they're a major contributor to our economy in many, because of some peculiarities of the way that we do things. Sometimes they have particular talents which are very creative. And in many large urban areas actually seek homosexual men out as major contributors to economies and economic development.
I'm going to engage in a bit of a stereotype here. I know that they dress better than I do. They have better fashion sense.
I've seen some really bad homosexual dressers, and I've seen some really snappy heterosexuals too. So I don't know that that's necessarily true.
Representative Oversen and Representative Boschee, what did you learn about the political process in the legislature from this experience?
Go ahead.
Well, I think, I was part of the group of people in 2009 that introduced this legislation with Senator Warner and Senator Fiebinger. And, being an outsider was different than being an insider. Now being in the chamber and being able to have the conversations on a daily basis with lawmakers, I think what I really learned is that we need to continue the conversation moving forward. There's a lot of lawmakers that want to find any excuse not to support something like this. And so as long as you can continue to counter those and be present to have those conversations with them, checking in with them on a regular basis, it's important. I think a lot of times people think, well, if I send my email to my representative or my senator, I've done my job. Well, opinions change from day to day depending on what information is presented to us. So it's continuing to work with that. And I think the value of partnerships. We developed a lot of relationships this time around than we had in 2009. We had the North Dakota Association of Realtors on board. The Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce was supportive of this bill because they recognize that sometimes it can impact recruitment of talent. And so it's a matter of building those relationships and moving forward and having those conversations.
Representative Oversen, what did you learn about the political process and how it works in the legislature from this whole experience, and where do you think things go from here?
Yeah, I think what I saw was a lot of the generational gaps and the stereotypes that still exist, and there's still a strong need for education and awareness of the issues affecting this community. And I think I take that for granted because I went to school at UND. We had a very welcoming, open community where this wasn't an issue. And granted, there's still some things to be done there, but statewide, I think there is still a lot of lack of awareness of the reality that discrimination does occur and that we do need to do something to stop it. Because there was oftentimes we heard, well, this surely can't be happening. This isn't real. We don't see this in our communities. But the problem was that people are afraid to speak out against it because they have no recourse. If their boss does find out that they are homosexual, they can get fired. So I guess process-wise, I learned how disappointing it can be to have something that you're so supportive of go down so quickly. But I mean, we still have a lot of encouragement. I think the next step is to bring this to a higher level and talk with our governor about his thoughts on this and what we can do moving forward. I
mean, you and Representative Boschee are both part of a new group of young legislators of both parties who are in the legislature now. And do you think that as your numbers increase, that your chances of getting a bill such as this through might become better? I was thinking specifically in the Senate hearing. I believe it was the gentleman representing the North Dakota State University who basically said that, the concept of discrimination against gays and lesbians was as alien to him as I don't remember what term he used, but it was completely alien to him. It was something that never occurred to him. It's like, discriminating against Martians or something. I mean, it was something that he took the presence of gays and lesbians in as part of his social fabric for granted, and that they should be treated just as anyone else. And the idea that someone felt differently than that was just astonishing to him. And I think that that's a fairly common worldview amongst folks of your generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the way I would speak to that is, 10 years ago when I was in college at NDSU, there was very few students that were out, or faculty and staff that were out. And then I continued working there, and as I came out myself and built relationships, it kind of became where our new normal was that there are gay and lesbian people everywhere, and it doesn't impact their quality of work or their ability to pay their rent. And so our new normal became where people were feel comfortable being out and a part of our community. And I think that as we expand this conversation, more and more people are going to continue to recognize in their own families and their communities that there are gay and lesbians, and they are just like anyone else, just happen to be gay.
Senator Warner, what do you think about the idea that as North Dakota becomes younger, the legislature especially, and more diverse because of the folks that are moving in, that the idea of discrimination against gays and lesbians will become, frankly, less acceptable?
I think you mentioned two things there. The younger generation coming up, and I think that's certainly true. One of the things I think that we don't emphasize enough, though, is the ethnic diversity of North Dakota and how that's going to affect the situation. The Fort Berthold Indian Reservation is in my district, and Native Americans can be in some ways quite conservative. They're very protective of their culture. And yet the 3 affiliated tribes has adopted gender-based non-discrimination clauses as probably 20 years ago. I didn't know of any other organization that did it as early as some of the Indian tribes did. But I think that they recognize some common ground there, that they're being discriminated against for reasons that they have absolutely no control over, nothing to do with. It has nothing to do with who they are, what their talents are. And I think that it's a wonderful attribute of Native American culture that they can be so welcoming and so open about it.
I'd like to ask this question of all three of you. I asked earlier, what did you learn from this in terms of how politics works in the Capitol? What sort of encouragement do you take from it? I mean, what sort of positive elements are there, if there are any, that you observed that can be put to service going forward?
Well, from my perspective, working in 2009 again and then this year, once again, those relationships, getting the Chamber of Commerce on board, the North Dakota Association of Realtors, who are groups that kind of stepped forward right away and said, yeah, this makes sense. This is good for business in North Dakota. And then also you look at who voted for it, and it's a lot. While we had the same people around in 2009 that voted for it, we had a number of new people who voted for it because it made sense to them as well. As I travel the country and do different work, a lot of times in other states, this is a partisan issue. The nice thing about North Dakota is this is a nonpartisan issue. You look at the vote count, you look at our co-sponsors. This is a conversation where we can talk across party lines and talk about everyone's family. When
you talk about your work, Representative Boschee, what is that work?
Well, I've been an organizer for a number of years before being elected office, and so I had the opportunity to travel to other states and work with them on their projects as far as organizing and advancing equality for the LGBT community.
Representative Oversen, what sort of positive things can you take from this?
Yeah, well, echoing a lot of what Josh has already said, in that the support has increased since the last time that we did this, and we right after that we heard the vote count, we were putting things up on social media sites, informing our supporters of the bad news, and the amount of support that they showed and said, thank you for standing up for this. We appreciate that you're continuing to fight, and the support to continue has been overwhelming, and the amount of young people that we've seen on campuses come forward and say, this is important to me and my family, I think is helpful, because like you were saying, the younger generation increasing in the legislature is going to make a difference. We've already seen that on a number of issues, so the support has been positive.
You mentioned social media as well. I think it's fair to say that social media had a negligible impact on things 4 years ago. How do you see social media and other new media strategies perhaps being able to benefit you in future campaigns?
I think it's beneficial to our generation in communicating with each other and getting points across and sharing the message. I think some of the older generation, that's where we hit a dead end, is we don't know how to communicate that to them as well. But I think positively, it's being able to spread the message more effectively and faster, and we're able to gain support for things like this in an instant. So I think that's very helpful.
I think the other thing is, it's real-time information. People aren't waiting for the article or the news anchor to show up and tell them the story. We're able to tell the story automatically, and so it really generates a lot of information and passes around. The trick is making sure it's accurate information and people are well informed that way.
If I could raise a word in defense of us dinosaurs.
Please. Someone has to defend the dinosaurs like me and all of us.
Well, I was struck today with the image of a Seurat painting. Seurat is a 19th century pointillist.
Yes.
And you had, I think in many cases, the modern media are used almost like point information. It's at such a granular level, and it's so discrete, and it's so particular to a particular moment in time that sometimes you really need to back away from it sometimes and take a little broader view. I mean, you can't understand a Seurat painting by getting your nose up into it. And that's my defense of dinosaurs everywhere.
Well, I was thinking as well is that I think it's fair to say that some folks think of Facebook participation as an end of it in itself rather than a means to an end. I mean, Facebook, if you're posting on Facebook, that's all really nice. But if you're in the legislature, such as Representative Boschee and Representative Oversen and yourself, Senator Warner, are pitching for this, that's worth a lot more than a couple of Facebook postings. Or if you're showing up and testifying at a hearing and talking to legislators and letting them see, your feelings about an issue of this nature, that's much more effective than, someone talking on Facebook about, these people turned us down, what is going through their head.
It was in the process, though, it was wonderful to be able to email a question to Josh or to Kylie and get the response in 30 seconds. It was almost in real time as far as being able to make a decision on which way to go.
What did you think, Senator Warner, where did you think the bill was going based on the result of the vote on the amendments? And what we're talking about here is there were amendments put up to the bill that essentially said, we do not condone discrimination against gays and lesbians as a matter of policy, but if you're a gay or lesbian person and you get discriminated against, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, this amendment was defeated before the bill itself was defeated. What did you think about when the amendment was defeated? What did you think that portended for the bill, if anything?
It was a really interesting dynamic. I had a Republican afterwards who didn't vote for either the amendment or the bill, but he said that the amendment somehow managed to offend absolutely everybody. It was intergenerational offense. You had the age discrimination things at the end, which offend and people in the middle age and elderly, and you had the stuff at the beginning, which really minimalized the needs of the gay and lesbian community and minimalized their recourse, and so that was offensive as well. At one point I thought, if they just put in the line, we do not condone homosexual discrimination, and left it at that might have been not too bad outcome. But then to actually put in those clauses that say, and we want to make darn sure that this does not it gives you absolutely no recourse.
Yeah, this is just. Earlier on, I was saying I wish the traffic laws worked that way. We should have. We as a matter of policy in North Dakota do not like it when you drive faster than 75 miles an hour on the interstate. But if you do it, we're not going to do anything to you. Right. And that would be quite an enjoyable world for me to live in. But what do you think that bill, the amendment to the bill, I mean, if let's just say hypothetically that the amendment had been attached to the bill and the bill had passed, would that be better than nothing?
I use the analogy. I would say no, first of all. And the analogy I use is, if I was discriminated in my housing today because I was gay, and I called the Department of Labor, the Department of Labor would say, we're sorry that happened to you. There's nothing legally we can do to help you with that. Had the amendment passed, the conversation would change. The department, I don't even know if the Department of Labor would say, we're sorry that happened to you, because they could say, we legally can't do anything for you. And so it really, I think, is a slap in the face to citizens that experience that discrimination.
Go ahead.
I think if the amendment had passed, there would have been absolutely zero chance that the bill would have passed. I mean, even less, it would have failed by a much greater margin, because as concerned as we are about the concerns of the gay community, the idea of selling down the river, the aged, and all of those other classes which had their recourse cut in half, I think that would have really bothered a lot of traditional liberals who would have naturally have supported it otherwise. I think it would have failed by a greater vote had the amendment stayed on.
What is your opinion, Representative Oversen? Do you think that the bill with the amendment would have been better than nothing?
No,
or nothing is better?
I agree that it would have been worse, because currently it doesn't say anything about sexual orientation. This would have said, it's okay for people to discriminate against you. We don't care. There's nothing we can do about it. And I think that's, especially looking at the youth in our state, especially those who might be struggling with their identity or their sexuality and afraid to come out because of the culture that we've created in our state, for our state to then put into law saying who you are is not okay and we're not going to protect you from discrimination is terrible. We saw a video that one of my friends from Grand Forks posted, and I don't know if the statistic is completely accurate, but it said that LGBT youth are 4 times more likely to commit suicide. And if it's not that, I'm sure it's really close. And it's saddening to think that our state would be willing to say, we don't care that you're being bullied or fired from your job or kicked out of your housing. There's nothing we can do about it.
My explanation of the amendment earlier was incomplete, and Senator Warner referred to this. It did say that there was a statement made in the amendment that the state will not condone discrimination against gays and lesbians, but if it did occur, there was nothing that would be done about it. There was no recourse that the gay or lesbian person had in the court system or anywhere else. But it also affected age discrimination. It said you do not have a prima facie case of age discrimination unless you were at least 55 years old, and now the age threshold is 40 years old. So in other words, you have to be 15 years older to have any chance of success on an age discrimination claim. And there was also a provision in the amendment that said if you win your age discrimination claim, you're eligible for only 1 year of back pay instead of 2. And that when Senator Warner mentioned that the amendment offended almost everyone, it was because of those reasons, as well as the lack of recourse for gay and lesbian people. I mean, I was just thinking, is it possible to, frankly, be in favor of discrimination against gay and lesbian people, but at the same time be offended by the notion that you're going to declare that it is part of state policy that this discrimination shall not occur, but there's nothing you can do about it if it does? It seemed like a very bizarre approach.
Senator Hogue had an interesting argument. He quite plainly and correctly laid out the concerns of the proponents of the bill. I thought he did a nice job on that. And then he spoke about the opponents, and he said, you realize that we can't do anything about the bigots out there anyway, that there's no affirmative thing that the state can do that's going to make a person less bigoted. And I thought it was an interesting choice of words. He didn't try to sugarcoat it.
Well, he also said, I thought this was particularly interesting, he said, you can't expect to come in here and throw the 80-yard touchdown pass. You have to make incremental progress. And the implication being that the amendment was acceptable incremental progress. And I thought that was an interesting statement.
I agree, because I think of it, if we're using the football analogy, we passed this overwhelmingly in the Senate 4 years ago. So I would say then we ran the football to my own end zone and scored one for the other team, And so, in relation to the, can you appease other people? And really what the argument against the original bill was primarily people of faith, and that's why we added the provisions in there that organizations that are faith-based would have an exemption from this. They were almost saying in some context that my religious freedom allows me to interact with people in this way or that way, and discrimination is part of that. It's almost I'm called to do that, and that's sad. And we recognize that we are a very faith-filled state. Well over 70% of our people in our state identify with one faith and attend worship regularly, and so we acknowledge that. But I think as we have that conversation, we're also hearing people of faith talk about how faith is used to support and to help LGBT people heal based on the damage that may have been done in other faith communities.
Mm-hmm. One of the issues that Senator Hogue raised, he used the metaphor of the way that the military had been integrated, how the gay and lesbian community had been integrated into the military. And he did it, he used his incremental approach that we had gone through, don't ask, don't tell, and then we'd gone to a more explicit statement of acceptance. But one of the things that strike me now is we have a fully integrated military, many of whom, I can quite frankly tell you, are gay, and we're feeling more and more comfortable about coming onto their officers. And yet they may not find a place to live in North Dakota. It's perfectly illegal in North Dakota law to discriminate against a member of the military because they are gay. I mean, they can be coming home from Afghanistan or Iraq and find that they have no place to stay, that they've been evicted from their homes based on their sexual preference. And I think that's really tragic.
We've been speaking this evening to Senator John Warner, a Democrat from Ryder, and the sponsor of a anti-discrimination bill to protect gays and lesbians from discrimination. This was defeated in the North Dakota Senate today. We also have had as our guest Representative Joshua Boschee, a Democrat from Fargo and a sponsor of the bill, and another sponsor, Representative Kylie Oversen, a Democrat from Grand Forks. They are both new members of the North Dakota Legislature serving in their first sessions. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it very much.